Okay.
I can keep going?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I have to say got it. Otherwise it won't like me. I attended the Zoom meetings regularly now. Went to the picnic recently. That was great. I got to meet people I hadn't ever met in person. So I want to thank Mended Hearts for all the support I've had over the years.
Great.
And I can
Great.
stop now.
Okay.
I can keep going if you want me to.
Rena, you're such a testament to person, just keeping going, persisting.
That's right.
Yeah.
With all the conditions and medical situations, I have to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What a
And
role
thank
model.
you. And thank you for coming to the picnic.
Oh, that was nice.
Yeah.
I had never met any of you in person since the last time I had been to anything Mended Hearts was back before the pandemic and before I had emergencies of one sort or another.
Okay. We're running ahead of time.
Well, you told me 5 minutes and I did.
Yes, you did, by golly. So why don't we go ahead with Trevor?
Hey everybody, I'm Trevor. I'm guessing I'm the newbie here. I just want to thank you all for having me. First of all, I am actually Carter Dunlap's stepson. So both Carter and I have had the privilege of going through heart surgery. You guys probably heard he's got another round coming up, so he's very excited about that.
Yeah.
So we get to we're going to have matching scars. I think previously he did the one through the femoral artery, so he didn't have the big scar, but he's doing the real deal this time. So I think rather than answering the questions, I thought I'd just kind of share my story ad lib here. So Susan, keep me honest. If I ramble on for too long, you just interrupt me anytime, okay?
Fine.
So I grew up kind of here in the Bay Area. I grew up in Piedmont. I grew up going to, excuse me, camp, lots of athletics growing up, never had any issues, losing my breath, nothing like that, no symptoms. So nobody in my family's had a history of any heart problems. My grandpa smoked for a long time, so he had a couple of surgeries, but we always so I ended up being a camp counselor when I was about 19. And part of being a camp counselor is you go through lifeguard training, right? So I was going through lifeguard training, swimming in the pool, and I started developing a real pain in my lower abdomen. And as anybody who's been in the medical field knows, that's a pretty sure sign of appendix issue. So had the appendectomy done, but in the pre-op for the appendectomy, the surgeon actually was listening to my heart and said, "Hey, has your doctor ever mentioned this heart murmur to you before? I'm hearing something funny going on." And no, right? We've never heard about this. Nobody had ever mentioned it. So he suggested that we go see a cardiologist. And so I was 19 at the time, didn't think it was a big deal, invincible, right? 19. So we saw the cardiologist, had some tests done, and sure enough, he discovered that it didn't have quite a bicuspid valve, but I think there was two and a little bit, there was a little leaflet nub there, so I definitely had some regurgitation issues. Still no symptoms, I'm operating fine, but the doctor said, "Hey, come back in a year, we'll see how things are going." John, I don't know if you're moving around a bit. If you don't mind muting, or Bill, I think you're the host. I think you can mute him. But there's quite a bit of noise coming from. There you go. Awesome. Cool. I like to hear myself talk. Can't be interrupted. So went back a year later. Doc said, "Okay, yeah, this hasn't progressed too badly. Come back in 5 years. You're looking fine. You probably won't have to worry about this thing till you're 50. Similar to John's experience, I was thinking, great, okay, whatever, people get heart surgery when they're older. I don't have to worry about this. So that was, I was 23, I think, at that point. I lost some years in the middle there, but ended up going back when I was 28 for this checkup. and they discovered that things had gotten significantly worse. So the moment you know it's a problem is when the EKG tech has to call in their supervisor and help them out, right? So I was on the EKG table for 45 minutes for a procedure that usually takes 15 or 20. So that was a little bit of a red flag. So ended up getting the surgery scheduled at Stanford with Dr. Fishbein. Fantastic experience. We went in. This was, it was COVID time, right? It was 2020, I think. Surgery was at late November. So unfortunately, the hospital was on lockdown, no visitors. You couldn't walk around, none of that stuff. But I ended up being in the hospital for 10 days. We did the aortic valve replacement with a mechanical valve. So I'm a clicker. If we ever get to meet in person, you guys can, come check me out. My wife has trouble sleeping sometimes because it's so loud, but
It will get better with time.
Oh, that's good to hear. Okay, cool. I think it's kind of fun, when you're in a quiet room, you can hear it. But I will never be very good at hide and seek, I guess. So they did the valve and then aortic root as well. I ended up being in the hospital for 10 days because I ended up in what they call INR jail. So before you get released, you need to have your INR at a certain level. And my body was metabolizing the drugs really quickly. So it took them a long time to get me up to the appropriate levels. Since being released, I thankfully, unlike you, Rena, have been able to get onto a trial. So I'm not on warfarin. I was on warfarin for INR is international something ratio.
International normalization ratio.
There we go. It's a measure of your blood your clotting in your blood. So they want to make sure that you have enough blood thinners in your system before they send you home. So I'm on a trial drug right now called Eliquis. So that's been great. I don't have to go get my blood drawn or anything. I can eat whatever I want. So it's been great. I mean, a year and a half into the 2-year trial. So hopefully they get that approved. So I don't have to go back on warfarin. Not that warfarin's the worst thing in the world, but I love being able to, drink and eat whatever I want. So yeah, that's most of my story. I'm here just in general, been meaning to get involved. I know Carter's been around for a long time, but I'm really excited to be part of the group and kind of contribute how I can. So thank you for having me.
Oh, thanks for coming.
Okay, I gave you, we had 2.5 extra minutes, thanks to Rena. And so you only used 1 extra minute. However, I would like to set my 2 cents in there is, since Carter's the president, you should join.
Oh, cool. Yeah. All right. Good to know people, right?
Right.
Okay, so Julie?
Yes, I'm here. Good morning, everybody. My name is Julie, and I'm a heart patient like you guys, and in the Salinas chapter down near Monterey. Laura asked me to give my story. So my story began in 1996 after the birth of my last child. The doctor said, hey, your heart sounds really weird. You probably should have your physician check that out. So I went to the doctor, and from 1996 until 2008, he could never pick up any of the heart irregularity when I'd go to my appointments. So he just would check me out every time I'd go in every year. So finally one year he said, I heard something. So you're going straight to a cardiologist right now. So from there it was, the MRI, the echocardiograms, and the Holter monitor, wearing for 2 weeks to see what happens. So get back to the office and get the results. And he says, yeah, you need to have mitral valve repair. And I just remember the room kind of like closing in on me and getting dark, but I didn't faint or anything, but it was just like, oh, this is like really going to happen, and he's like, but we're going to do the watch and wait and see what happens program for you. So every year we'll just do an echo and see how your valve's doing. So every year I'd go in and I'd tell the guy every time, because I had the same tech. He said, I don't want any drama. I don't have time. I have kids. So I know. So in 2011, I went in and he said, I did the thing. I said, okay, just don't forget, no drama this time. And his face just went blank, you know. And I thought in my heart, I know it's time. And so I went home. I didn't say anything to my husband. I just waited for them to call me. And they waited about 3 weeks to call me. And they said, you need to come in and have an MRI like tomorrow. And I said, no, I just had a surgery on my foot. I'm not coming in right now. And the girl on the phone was very, she sounded very upset that I wasn't going to come in. And she's like, well, I'm going to have the doctor call you. And I said, go ahead. I'm not coming in. So he called me a couple hours later and I just said, I just had surgery. I'm not coming in. I don't feel up to it. No. And so he's like, okay, I'm going to follow up with you in a few weeks. So he calls me back in a couple weeks and said, okay, can you come in and do an MRI now? And I thought, well, I can do that at least. So I went in and had this hour, 45-minute long MRI, and thank heavens for tranquilizers, or else I would never be able to do that. But after that, my husband and I went to his office for our appointment, and he pulls out his phone and he says, okay, how about this day for an angiogram? And I was like, okay. And then he wanted to schedule surgery, but I just had that foot surgery and the wound gapped open. So they had to go back in and debride that and close it up. So that put me out another 8 weeks. So I was on crutches for 18 and a half weeks. When I met the surgeon, he's like, well, don't drag your feet. And I'm like, hello, you know, do you see I'm on crutches? And he's like, yeah. So by then it was February. I went into the office to meet the surgeon again and say, I want to schedule a date. He's like, well, it's about time you're not dragging your feet anymore. And I said, well, I was really kind of rude to him. I said, do you remember when you first met me? I was on crutches. You couldn't do a surgery. I couldn't get around on crutches after a heart surgery. So sometimes they just are so rude to you, you know. So I had the surgery a couple weeks later and came through fine, had mitral valve repair, and went to cardiac rehab. So for those of you who haven't had any surgeries yet, or maybe a spouse listening in, cardiac rehab is the best thing that you can possibly do to get your body, you know, up and running, and give yourself confidence to continue on. And it was in cardiac rehab that I met a Mended Hearts person, and they talked me into doing the visits with them in the heart center. And that's not my thing, to talk to people, really, you know, cold call. That's kind of like a cold call, I guess. But I went with him and I thought I could kind of do this. And after a few weeks of visiting, I thought, no, this is just not my thing. I can share with people, but going into the hospital was kind of just not my thing. So anyway, one day we were visiting, and this lady who walked in her room, and she just had her head in her bowl of oatmeal and wouldn't even look at us. And we always ask, what are you doing here? Because we want them to tell their story, you know, get their story started, at least told. And she said, oh, I had mitral valve repair. And I said, oh, I had that. And she popped up her head and sat up and looked at me, and she goes, but you look good. And I said, well, it's been 6 months. You can look good in 6 months too. And after that, she, you know, had so many questions, and we also recommended cardiac rehab. And I would love to see where she is today, how she's doing. Of course, we don't ever remember the names of the people, you know, we just kind of move on room to room. But after that, I decided that being a Mended Hearts visitor was something I should do to help other people who have no hope. And that's really one of the mottos of Mended Hearts, right? To, you know, give hope to patients and their families. So that's my story. And it's been 10 years.
30 seconds.
Okay, it's been 10 years now, and I still exercise and try to eat right and try not to eat packaged foods. And okay, there you go.
And just as a note, Julie has gone on to help, and you are now the regional
Assistant Regional Director of the
Yeah.
Western Region for Mended Hearts. Yes.
So she's making a difference all over the place.
Trying.
Thank you, Julie.
You're welcome. Thanks for asking.
And we go to John Stansberry next.
Unmute himself. Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good, because I just unmuted myself. Right. Well, I'm glad we're doing this, and I want to thank Laura for her idea of putting this together. So most of my life, I've been one of the healthy people that never got sick, never missed work. And I don't want to say never, but when somebody would get the flu and be down for a week, I'd have a headache and maybe stay home for a day. But now I've got something wrong with me, and I'm having a tough time dealing with it. I have congestive heart failure, and there's a lot of different things that people can do to reverse heart disease, but there's nothing I can do to reduce the damage to my heart, because once the muscle has been damaged, it can't repair itself. How I found out about this was I was progressively becoming harder and harder for me to exert myself physically. I used to be a backpacker, and when I was 60, I climbed Mount Whitney, which was quite a feat for me. And but I just kept getting more and more, or less and less, able to exercise. And looking back on it, I should have wondered about the heart, but what I was thinking is, well, maybe you've got emphysema, or maybe you have lung cancer, or maybe this, or maybe that. It just never occurred to me that it might be a heart problem. And, but I got to the point where I couldn't walk more than 25 or so steps. And finally, my wife suggested, you better go in. And of course, right away, when I told the doctor I was short of breath, the first thing he did was send me down for an EKG and then make an appointment with the cardiologist and on and on. So it was a pretty easy diagnosis of what was going on. And my particular thing is, there are lots of ways to have heart failure, but mine is electrical, whereas my left ventricle, the lower left chamber that pumps the blood out into the body, the ventricles are supposed to fire off at the same time, be synchronized. And my left one goes off prematurely. They call it premature ventricular contraction. And that makes the heart work harder, and that made the heart get enlarged, and that made it unable to pump efficiently. So the amount of blood I pump out with each beat is about half of what a normal person does. So I go to Kaiser in Oakland. I've been very pleased with their care. I've looked up stats about survival rates with congestive heart failure, and I'm doing pretty well. By all my test numbers and everything, I've basically the same as I was when I got diagnosed 5 years ago. So I feel pretty fortunate about that. But there's one thing that I wish our medical system would move into, and that is looking not just at the medical side, which has been fine with me. I haven't had to have any stents or anything like that. They did put in a pacemaker thing so that my ventricles can more frequently beat at the same time. Not 100%, but it's up to 93%, which they're happy with, and I'm happy with, because before that it was 80%. So of course that means you're getting sicker and sicker by the day. The problem for me was I've never had to face anything like this, and I didn't really know how to deal with the idea of death. And I'm married. I have a happy relationship with my wife and a happy relationship at home. I have 5 grandkids, and I'm close to my daughters and the rest of my family. So in terms of a support group, I have a good support group. But what I really wanted was the kind of thing Julie was talking about, was somebody that I could talk to who had the same thing that I did. And at Kaiser, they didn't have anything like that. Finally,
30 seconds.
30 seconds, okay. Finally, I have a heart failure nurse that specializes in congestive heart failure. And she suggested that I go to Mended Hearts. And that's how I ended up with you all. So thank you.
Good timing.
Glad you're here, John.
Yes.
Okay, and Martha.
She has to unmute herself.
Oops.
How's that?
Way
Perfect.
better.
Okay.
We can hear you now.
So I'll just tell you my story. I was teaching and on the second floor of a building, and coming up the stairs, I kept getting tired. And I thought, wow, I'm getting old and out of shape. And it was the last week of classes, and my students were watching a movie, and I was walking down the hall, which was flat, and I still felt out of breath and having problems. So I thought, I'm not that old and out of shape. So I called Kaiser, and we took my heart rate, and it was in the 40s. And I'm not in that good a shape, so it should be in the 40s. So they had me come in, and unfortunately, I decided to drive myself, which looking back was not a good idea, because I went from Pleasant Hill to Kaiser Oakland. Got there, the doctor was going to give me a Holter monitor. And then she went away for a while. I don't know what she did. She talked to somebody or went online. And she came back and put me in a wheelchair and wheeled me over to the ER.
Wow.
So I was there all evening, and then they started doing tests. They admitted me. They did lots of tests. And they finally decided that I had second-degree heart block. So what was happening is my upper chambers and lower chambers were not coordinated. It was an electrical problem. And they finally decided to send me over to Kaiser in San Francisco. So they took me by ambulance over there. And it worked out to have a much nicer room. I had my own room and own bathroom. Whereas before I was in a room with somebody else with lots of visitors. And they did some more tests and decided that my coronary arteries were good. So that was nice. And on Friday, the doctor gave me a pacemaker. And on Saturday, I went home. Now, since then, they've figured out that I also have AFib, and I take Pradaxa for that. I didn't want to take warfarin because I didn't want to have to worry about my diet, etc. So I got this pacemaker 11 years ago. And then last year, I got a replacement. That was worse than the first time because they had to dig out the old one. And it scared me because they gave me fentanyl, which is the big thing that everybody's dying of these days.
Yeah.
That and lidocaine. And I was awake during the procedures before I slept through it. So I felt tugging and some pain. Okay. Now, the big question was, why did I get this? I didn't have any coronary artery problems. And 21 years ago, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And I had 2 surgeries for that. And then I elected to have chemo. And then I also had 30 radiation treatments. Well, it turns out some of the chemo can cause heart problems, and so can radiation. So we don't know why, but probably the chemo and or the radiation damaged my heart. So it's an electrical problem. And I have secondary heart block, which is unstable. Actually, now I think I have probably 3rd degree. I don't think there's any good communication. I'm on the pacemaker almost all the time now. So I think the communication is not good at all in my heart. But last year I got the second pacemaker. And that's, so that's really my history there. I don't think I've changed my life much because of it. I just tried to make sure the cat doesn't step on it when it across my body. What's affected me more probably is having type 2 diabetes. That's changed my lifestyle more. And I should exercise more and eat more properly. But I try to watch my diet. I'm not as good at exercising as I should be. So that's basically my story. A good thing was I was teaching anatomy, so I could use my experiences in my classroom. And I had old pacemakers to show the students. So I have two.
What are you teaching? I'm sorry, what are you teaching?
Anatomy. Human anatomy is what I was teaching. I'm retired now, so I'm not anymore. But I have 2 wires, two leads, one into my atrium, right atrium, one into my right ventricle to keep me coordinated. Otherwise, like it wouldn't work. And my heart rate went down a couple of times, I know, to 29, which is not consistent with life. So I definitely have to have a pacemaker.
Whoa.
So I was afraid I would run out of time, but I guess I'm okay. So that's pretty much my story. Like I say, I take Pradaxa for my AFib, and I take cholesterol, atorvastatin, to keep my cholesterol down. Although it wasn't high, it was close to being high.
30 seconds now.
Okay, that's about it. Thank you. Oh, and I found out about Mended Hearts when I was visiting my cardiologist. I saw a sign, and that's when I started going to Mended Hearts.
Are you at Kaiser?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm at Kaiser Oakland.
Yeah.
I had my surgery at Kaiser, and my second surgery I had at Kaiser Oakland, but my first one was at San Francisco.
Okay.
And I had a very nice room.
Thank you, Martha. Okay. Sally?
Well, in 2017, at an annual exam with a new primary care doctor, I was referred to a cardiologist to have an echocardiogram. And for at least 30 years or so before that, my doctors had been aware of a heart murmur caused by my mitral valve. It was considered a mild mitral valve prolapse with no leakage of blood, and it was something that could potentially just remain that way indefinitely without further problems. But the echocardiogram showed that I had severe mitral regurgitation, which meant that the valve was now leaking severely. So open heart surgery was the only option. So my first reaction was just pretty much a disbelief, because it was really like it came out of nowhere. I thought I was doing fine with this ongoing condition that I'd had for so long. And it seemed even more unreal because I had had no symptoms and really just didn't have any idea anything was wrong. So I found out that it's actually fairly common for people not to have symptoms with mitral valve regurgitation. And it can go on for years, and then suddenly it can get worse very suddenly. So I wasn't supposed to wait too long to do surgery, because it's important to avoid causing damage to other parts of the heart by letting it go on too long. But I didn't have to rush. Ideally, I was to plan to have surgery within maybe 6 months to a year and keep things monitored. So one of my biggest problems was that it was really important to me now to find out everything I could about this condition and about the surgery involved, because it was just all so new to me. I wanted to be able to make the right choices for anything that I might have options about, ask the right questions in talking with a surgeon. But I had to force myself to even think about the reality of what was going on. I just was tuning myself out. And so for months, I found myself putting other things first and just kind of avoiding moving ahead. And I had this, oh, you've got a year, and so it was just very hard for me to take action. And at the same time, it was really important to me to find out everything. So it was pretty stressful. I just couldn't seem to get out of that treadmill. At that time, I would have liked to have talked to someone who had mitral valve repair surgery. I really wanted to have that feedback and back and forth with someone who had been through that situation, but I wasn't able to find anybody. A cardiologist in Oakland did suggest that I contact Mended Hearts, which was the first that I had heard of the group. So that was great. I did call. I was able to talk with someone then who was a heart patient and find out about the group. So I knew I had, that out there to maybe take part in. And later on, after my surgery, I did find a couple of people to talk to who had mitral valve repair done. And I found it really interesting to compare my experience. But in looking for information, one resource that I did find, and I wanted to mention it because I think it's such a good one. It's a website called heartvalvesurgery.com. And it's a real storehouse of information. It was started by a former, I don't know if anybody's familiar with it, but it was started by a former heart valve patient. Information about all types of heart valve issues specifically. information about surgeons and hospitals and discussions with doctors. They do webinars and it's very doctor endorsed. A lot of the around the country, a lot of well-known doctors really kind of interact with it. And they have a patient community that's open to anyone who wants to sign up. You sign up and create a page for yourself. And a lot of people join this thing before surgery, or, you know, when they want to find out more, or if they want to keep track of things along the way, where there are message boards. You can ask questions back and forth. And there's a lot of dialogue that goes on among heart valve patients. So it's a site that's well worth looking into, I think, if, you know, if anybody has heart valve interests. Anyway, I kept working at getting as much information as I could. Found out that the mitral valve can now almost always be repaired instead of replaced, and that the minimally invasive
30
procedures,
seconds.
okay, are really well developed. Even the classic sternotomy, though, it can be done with a smaller incision in case that's the choice of a surgeon to, you know, for a more complex procedure. And anyway, I decided that if I had more than one option for type of procedure, I'd be in favor of the one that would give the best result for the most complete and long lasting repair that could be done versus trying to seek, you know, the maybe more preferable cosmetic incision. And I felt pretty good about what I learned when I did my final talking with doctors. The thing I was most glad about was that I forced myself to do all the research, so I knew what questions to ask and to feel comfortable with, you know, what the choice I made for the surgery that I had. And that's about it.
Okay.
Perfect.
Sally, thank you.
Yeah.
And our last speaker for today is Bill.
Good afternoon. So here's my story. It's interesting. Everybody used a different approach than the lovely outline that Laura had supplied us all. So my story is that I'm one of those people who trust the experts when they tell you something, primarily because I spent 20 years as a consultant, and therefore I was a quote unquote expert. Companies hired me, and you know, I felt that I was giving excellent advice. So I trust the experts. So in my story is Kathleen and I were living in Las Vegas in 2011. And in late February or early March, I had 2 angina attacks, had an angiogram, and the doctor, Carlos Emmanuel, who I'll talk about a little bit later, said the good and bad news was the heart's in great shape, but a couple of the blockages in places that prohibit doing a stent. This, you have to have a CABG, you know, coronary arterial bypass graft. At the same time, Kathleen and I had already decided that we were going to move back to the Oakland, San Francisco Bay area in about 3 months. So I was under pressure and in urgency to either operate now or take the chance of making a major physical move with a heart not in great shape and what might happen. So when I was told about the angiogram, or when I had the angiogram, it was done at the University Medical Center, which is the public hospital in Las Vegas. We were living in Las Vegas at the time. And like most public hospitals, I think about Highland, it's a great hospital to have a surgery, but not a great one for recovery because of patient mix. While in the recovery that day from the angiogram, Dr. Manuel said that the chief cardiosurgeon for UMC was coming in in about 15 minutes, and he'd be happy to stop and tell me what the operation was all about. So in comes Neil Deshita, a native of Houston, Texas, rather handsome, wearing cowboy boots, whose family was from India, and he swept in and with his Texas drawl and team of 10 stops to talk with Kathleen and I about what be involved in the CABG. He covered what was involved and if I didn't do it in the recovery. He asked if we had any questions. And I asked, what about having to do this again? Will this happen again? And he said, a good question. You're 72 now. You start building a plaque when you're 18, 19, 20 years old, say 52 years ago. And he said to me, I hate to tell you, Mr. Dean, but you're likely not to be around in another 52 years. And we all cracked up. So he didn't want to be a patient at UMC. And living across the street from us in Las Vegas was one of the leading cardiologists, Keith Bowman, in the city of Las Vegas. So I went to him and I said, laid out what happened. And I said, Keith, what would you recommend? He says, I'd use Nancy Donahoe out at Summerlin Medical Center. She was the first female thoracic surgeon in the state of Nevada. And in her spare time, if she hadn't been a surgeon, she could have been a model for the Irish Tourist Board. She looked like the stereotypical Irish Colleen. She really did. Very cute, very good surgeon. While I was in the surgery, or while I was at the medical center, and Kathleen happened to be there at the time, I was visited by a Mended Heart visitor from the Las Vegas chapter. The Las Vegas chapter is one of the larger chapters of Mended Hearts. It supplies visitors to 6 different hospitals in Las Vegas. And that's how I found out about Mended Hearts. So 3 months later, we moved back to the Bay Area. We had lived in San Francisco for 15 years. And I looked up and found chapter 188, whose president at that time was Steve Potash, and I joined. And I truly believe that I've gotten more from Mended Hearts than I have given, especially being a visitor. I can't tell you how interested most patients are to talk with someone who has been through a heart procedure. The medical staff are great, but there's a huge difference between lying in the bed and standing beside the bed when it comes to advice. Oh, and back to Carlos Emmanuel for a moment. Post-surgery, I saw him again, and he is from Lima, Peru, where he did his medical studies before coming to Miami to do his residency.
30 seconds.
He is by far the best cardiologist I ever had. His patient care bedside manner was the best. And he attributes that to the fact that South America and Europe stresses bedside manner in their in medical training versus the United States, which up until recently stressed the physical side. So my experience wasn't scary. I wasn't frightened by it. And in fact, on the day of the operation, I was scheduled for the 11 o'clock surgery, but had to be there at 6:30. And I was so blasé about the whole thing, I actually fell asleep in the pre-op room. And that's one last thing. I found that in prepping for this talk, I still have the wristband from the Summerlin Medical Center. But unfortunately, I no longer have the pillow that they gave me while I was there.
Here it is.
Oh, look, Steve got his.
And that's my full story.
Thank you, Bill. What a great experience. Well, so how did that feel for everybody? Was it overwhelming to have 8 people be able to talk?
No, I think
Interesting.
Very.
I think it was very good. And I think that I wanted to stress the fact that this is, I think, what is the part that what makes Mended Hearts is the everybody sharing their stories, the support. It's peer-to-peer support. It's the second oldest peer-to-peer support group in the United States. The only one older is Alcoholics Anonymous. And I think that's what makes so much different versus having, and no disrespect of the medical profession and what they provide, but I think that's really good to be able to talk to other heart patients.
I want to add that one of the things that drew me to Mended Hearts was because I went to my first meeting 6 weeks after the surgery, bypass surgery. Okay. It was nice to see other people with heart problems who are functioning, who are doing things.
Yeah.
And as a visitor, I still appreciate the fact that, I can go in and I still call us vertical role models, because lots of people have said exactly what Bill said, that, they look at you and, or that one of you said that you're standing there telling them, you've had heart something or other, and they look at you and all of a sudden they've got some hope that they're going to get out of that bed and they're going to get better and have a life too. And I think that's important.
I love that about Julie's story. I could just see someone who's got their head in the oatmeal bowl, you know, just this has got to be the worst thing. And then to see someone come in who is, like you said, Susan, vertical and functioning and had the same thing. Oh, what hope that gives you.
One of the things I appreciate, Laura, about Mended Hearts is throughout the years, via the programs, we get to learn about so many different things. And I think that's one of the strengths of our, again, program and program committee. So hats off to you and the whole committee. But as I'm listening to these stories, this is to me kind of the same thing, is that everybody's story is a little bit different. And so you learn a little bit more. And then, you know, in total, it's just so much more educational, because you hear about, you know, what people have faced and what they've overcome. Plus, it's to connect with people with similar experiences. I echo with what Bill said. Not, you know, the information we get is great and valuable. The second, this connection opportunity we have is equally as valuable, I think.
Yeah.
I
Well,
also want somebody, I think it was Julie or somebody earlier mentioned, and I do want to second it, and I stress this as a visitor with heart patients, is the importance of cardio rehab. That many heart patients are not in good physical shape when they got in, or they wouldn't be there. A lot of them are overweight. And I stress to them that it's really, for me, I know personally, it's what got me going to the point that literally 3 months after I have the operation, I'm moving back to the Bay Area, and the mover shows up and I'm picking up boxes of books, which weigh, what, 35, 40 pounds, unpacking them. And considering that they had just had cut my chest open 3 months ago, I thought that was pretty good.
Wow.
You know, the cardio rehab is great from 2 points of view. For those that are not in good shape and need to get in good shape, it's invaluable. But the other was, I was in fairly good shape when I had my surgery, but it was so nice to get back to being physical again. I thought it was the best thing. I agree with Julie. It was one of the best things that ever happened to me.
When I had the surgery, they didn't have a rehab. I had to develop my own program. And then they kicked me out and I had to do it myself. But I was in good shape. I had I was a hiker and a biker.
Wow.
You know, one of the problems with cardio rehab, unfortunately, is I would say probably 1 out of every 3 patients, and I think that Susan would support me on this, and maybe even Julie, when you talk to the patient, they always say, well, they're checking on whether or not my insurance will cover it. And that is a major issue, as we know with a lot of medical insurance, is what is and is not covered.
That wasn't even the issue. I got an exercise bike, a stationary bike, and I worked on that because Kaiser didn't have anything to offer me. Nothing.
I know I tried to get back into cardio rehab, and I was told that and I'm at Kaiser also, that it was only available a certain length of time after your surgery, and then I was ineligible for it. And
that could have been, yeah.
I talked to my cardiologist and I said, even if you write a note, and he said, I have tried with other patients. Maybe it will work if you can, make a strong case. And that's when I found that the advocacy part of Mended Hearts, the first thing they're doing is putting a bill through Congress that will increase insurance for cardio rehab. And they are hoping that we will support them in this issue. And in fact, we've got the PowerPoint, and we'll get someone to tell us where they are in the process right now. But that would be the first thing, don't you think? Insurance will pay for it.
Laura,
explain.
I have a question, Laura. Are you going to address any of the issues that are in the chat room? Any questions?
Well, let's see.
I think we have a few minutes and I thought we were going to do that.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Are there questions? Let's see. Well, there's the internal normalization ratio. Thank you, Rena and Trevor, for explaining that.
It's actually international normalization ratio.
Oh.
INR.
Oh, I beg your pardon. I wrote, yeah. And you're right, not consistent with life. Trevor, who said that? That was that?
I think Martha. It's just a really nice way to say that.
Phrase.
Not something to be expected, I guess.
And thank you for putting in what Sally referred to, that website, heartvalvesurgery.com. And
That is a good one.
I put in the benefits of peer support. That's from the website. And they've actually got a number that you can call to get support now. And I thought I might call it and see what kind of support they give. So,
That's it in the chat room. There aren't any other.
yeah. So, anybody want to?
I have one sort of a cute story. As I mentioned earlier, that my surgeon was is a woman, a female surgeon. And post that, recently I've had to have some surgery on both of my shoulders. And in the process, they've taken x-rays, and then with the x-rays have been white enough that I've been able to see the sternum where they cut it open to do the bypass operation. And as you may recall or know, that when after the operation and when they're closing, they wire the sternum together because they can't put you in a cast because it's a broken bone. And that's really what has to operate. The big thing for the bypass operation on recovery is that broken bone or the cut chest. And I attribute it, although it probably was an associate, I attribute it to Nancy, but those 3 stainless steel wires that hold my chest together or right after the surgery are perfectly placed, and each one is identical. So I attribute that to her, being a woman, being, more concerned about the cosmetic aspect, even though nobody other than on an x-ray will ever see it.
Well, how about from our people who are listening? Sherry and Lorraine, I'm so glad you could make it. Yay! And Steve and May, was this a wonderful time for you? Or
Yeah, loved it. Great stories.
Most interesting.
Yeah.
Really good. Really good.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Yeah.
How about one for the caregivers? What would you think?
I think that'd be a good program to hear from the other side, because sometimes can be more worrisome, I would think, for the person who's not the patient than for the patient.
I think a lot of times it's more worrisome, and I will. Bill and I went to a Mended Hearts National Convention in San Diego a number of years ago. They gave us a wonderful bag I still have and use. However, due to a whole lot of circumstances, I arrived late, and it was at the beginning of a luncheon, and I slid into the only vacant seat available and ended up talking with a woman who is the president of her chapter somewhere in Pennsylvania. And it turns out that she was the caregiver, not the patient. Her husband had died a while ago. But at her Mended Hearts meetings, they always started the meeting with the caregivers in a separate room from the patients so that each group could talk about their own concerns. So I think caregiving is important. I really do.
Wonderful.
I also want to thank Trevor for coming, because a little youth in our group.
I agree.
I'm dropping the average age here quite a bit, I guess.
Yes, it's wonderful.
Definitely.
Well, and of course, We would love to welcome you to the program committee.
Yes.
If you can't get into visitor right away.
I don't know. Program committee, we might end up having like a keg party or something.
And we support your technology issues too by sending out all those reports. So thanks.
Okay, well, we don't always need to end at 11, but we are close. But I really wanted to give the people who gave the stories also a little chance to tell us what it was like. Was it hard to prepare? Was it not, was it too much time, too little time? Did you want to say more?
I'm not sure if I missed some things, but my valve was replaced in 1993.
Wow.
So I've had it for a long time.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And the heart failure developed after emergency surgery because I was pumped with too many fluids, which I didn't appreciate, but I can't prove that, so I left it.
I thought the timing was perfect, Laura. I think 5 minutes goes by very quickly, and it's great. I think it's a lot of variety for the rest of the group, so I think it worked well.
I second that, Laura.
I agree.
Yeah, it's fine. It was fine for me.
And I was trying to take some notes so I could remember. Well, now let's see who's had the mitral, who's had the AVR, who's got the pacemaker and the cabbage and all, so that we can, when the program committee is trying to think of things that would appeal, there's so many.
Just put it on one and
to
grab me some of that
look at.
African. I'll put it with this.
It's wonderful to have help and to find the way to meet what it is you're looking at. We'd love to have you come and talk to us or give us ideas. So don't forget about the survey at the beginning of next year. Please put in some more things you want to talk to. And to introduce you to the survey or to the team so far, we've got Lorraine is here, John Stanberry is here, and Sally is here. So the four of us are the committee, and it's been wonderful working with them and for all of you. Julie, thank you for stepping in and helping. I just love your story.
Yeah.
Thank you. I really enjoy hearing other people's stories too. It is, it's interesting to me to hear them and just to know that we're not alone, as we go through this. So.
I thought it was the right amount of time, a good amount of time to not have to go on and on and on. And that I found it a little hard when I started putting just some thoughts together, because some of the things I didn't want to think back about, I had struggled with them at the time so much. It was funny, but it was what I thought was good about doing this was just sort of the informal interaction of, as a group sitting and talking with each other and sort of getting feedback, even if just from hearing the story without talking back and forth. That it would be great to have other ways that we set up some meetings or some get-togethers or something that would for just informal sharing of maybe even spontaneous stuff that is going on. I don't know how well that works, but it's a nice addition to what we usually do, I think.
Well, it's not lost on us that our most populated meetings are the two that we have in person. And this one with 15 has been one of our better attended than some of the others that we work really hard to put together.
Laura, we actually had 16 because John Constantine was on too.
Ah.
So there was 16.
Okay, great.
Well, I thought it was a very successful meeting. Thank you, Laura, for putting it all together.
Well, thank you, Susan. And I check over in the chat. Guess who is here? Carter Dunlap.
Yes.
Yeah.
Woohoo!
He's
Oh.
at the airport.
Yeah.
Yeah, he joined us very late.
Yeah, yeah. So he's waiting to put it into YouTube.
Ah. Well, wonderful.
I can foresee that maybe becoming my job at some point.
I think that, yeah.
Yay!
No offense,
Please,
to
Trevor,
but
please.
he might actually just be calling me after this to ask me. How
You can count on that, I'm sure.
Well,
I-
actually,
he did-
I think it's time for us to get off so he can make that call before.
Before he's off.
The only thing, Trevor, ask him what the backlog of programs he has to put on YouTube. You might find that you got 2 weeks worth of solid work.
Yeah.
Trevor,
God,
I sent him I sent Carter. He sent me a Excel spreadsheet with all the ones that he had or he could find, and so I gave him the bios on the people for all of the rest of them, as well as those. So I would be glad to send that to you as well.
Sure, yeah. We'll get the account ownership transferred over when Carter's back from vacation. Great.
Okay.
Had me as a
Thank
collaborator.
you.
Great, thanks, Trevor.
Carter's generally overbooked himself, if you guys haven't noticed, so happy to help where I can.
Well, that's great. And we appreciate your input and being a member too. We'll get that to going. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, anything else from anybody?
Time to call it quits.
All right.
See you next
Bye.
month.
Have a nice
Take care,
weekend.
everyone.
See you next
Thank you.
month.
Bye-bye.
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 Bye-bye.